Hello, 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 and welcome to Most Writers Are Fans, the podcast that explores the intersection between writing and fandom. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm your host. So today's episode is pretty cool. I've talked to Kyle Prue, the How to Piss Off Men guy from TikTok and Instagram. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. If you haven't, you're in for a treat. But I want to talk to Kyle because, first of all, he has a new book coming out, which is very cool. It's based on how to piss off men. But then he also is a pretty successful guy he has a web series that he writes and produces. He had a young adult series whenever he was younger. He was sort of like a kid writing books for kids. He is also a playwright. So he's like all kinds of a writer. He also has a newsletter on Substack that he does. So he's like all over the place. And he does like essays in that. So I really enjoyed talking to him. But we also talked a lot about, because he's kind of, he's sort of like this genius when it comes to social media because he became very famous doing this like very specific thing, and he sort of led to his success as an author. And so I want to talk to him about like sort of like promotion and social media because in my conversations with other authors, it's became very clear to me that that's sort of like the area where authors are sort of like the most confused about what to do. Because first of all, like it takes so much time. It's like endless amounts of time. But beyond that, it's also just like, what do you do? How do you do it? And it's not... For a lot of authors, it does not come naturally. And I think for a lot of authors, they're not naturally like used to putting themselves out there in this way. And it's just very unnatural for a lot of people. So I thought that Kyle might have some insight, and he did. He fully did. So stay tuned for that. But I also want to talk a little bit in this intro about something that came up at the end of the interview that I wanted to get into a bit more, but I really didn't get a chance to, which is this idea that like sometimes whenever we get known for a thing, there's this fear in the back of our head, sort of like always and forever, that that's going to be the thing we're always known for, right? Like I remember hearing this story about how whenever Sarah Palin came on to SNL with Tina Fey didn't want to be in a side-by-side with her because she was like, this is the picture that will be at my funeral. People will always remember me as the impersonator of Tina Fey, as Sarah Palin, and I don't want to be associated with that as like the pinnacle of my career because like it isn't. Like she's done so many other amazing things. And like, so I asked Kyle in the interview, like, do you sometimes worry about like sort of always being the How to Piss Off Men guy? Because, like he has like over 1 million followers. So like those people mostly know him for that thing. Like that's just a fact, but he works on so many other things that like, clearly that's not where he wants his full identity to be. And I relate to that so hard because like whenever I started this podcast exists as a way to promote my writing and my books and the things that I do. Like whenever I introduce myself to people, I say like Terry Bartley, fantasy writer. I don't say Terry Bartley, fantasy writer and podcaster. Like this is sort of like a part of my identity that I want to kind of be like just an extension of what I'm already doing. I want to kind of start going more all in on this podcast and let this be something that I'm like actually working on and sort of like really investing time and money and resources into. And in doing that, like, it's possible that should this really take off, this could be the thing that I'm known for. And then the fantasy writing is just kind of like a thing that I do on the side. And, like, I think that the reason I was so resistant initially to kind of do that with this was that I don't want to be the guy that interviews writers, and that's the thing that I do. But, that somewhere along the way, like, first of all, I've started to really enjoy doing this podcast. I think it's fun. I enjoy talking to people. I think it's really fulfilling for me to sort of like talk to people that do what I do and sort of like build out this peer network in a way that feels more authentic for me. But also, somewhere along the way, it's become very cool to me to showcase people that people may not know about without this podcast. People like Kirsha Fox, people like Spencer Jordan, people like Amanda B. Weaver. Like, those are all really incredible indie people that might not get the same exposure. Like, people might listen to my podcast and have never heard of them had it not been for my podcast. And I love that. Like, I love the idea of that. So somewhere along the way, like, I realized I liked the idea of this podcast being something that could sort of showcase, like, not just like these bigger interviews for me, like this one today with Kyle Prue, or, the one I did with Sub Radio, but also it can be a place to showcase people that are kind of like up and coming. And I want to always have sort of like a balance of that as this podcast. If it grows, whatever happens to it, I'd always love to showcase a bit of a balance of sort of like these bigger people as well as like some of these like up and coming people that I want to have as part of my peer network, And the other thing that I kind of have like landed on, and I think this is just like something that you have to face eventually when you do this kind of stuff, is like, it's frankly better to be known for something that you're doing than to be known for nothing at all, you know? And as much as I want to be, I want to be talked about in the same breath as like Rainbow Rowell and Patrick Rothfuss, I also would love people to talk about me at all, you know? And I think that's just the reality of it, because if no one's talking about me ever, then no one's ever going to find my books, right? But if people talk about me because of this podcast, then it's possible that they might eventually also talk about me because of my books. And I think that's the thing that you got to kind of like realize is like, maybe for Kyle, he doesn't want to be known forever as the How to Piss Off Men guy. But if people talk about him about that, they're going to also find his book. They're also going to find his Substack. They also might find Rabbit. And I think that you sort of have to realize, like, that's okay. And it's just sort of, it goes back to, like, this all being promotion, Like, if people talk about me because of this podcast, then it's a promotional tool to then bring people to the other places I want them to find me. So I think that maybe what I'm really getting at and what I'm really trying to say is like we need to just get out of our own heads. I think that sometimes we're our own worst enemy with these like super like weird mental conundrums that we come up with when we're doing this kind of thing. And like just let people find you how they find you. And I think if you're lucky, the thing people do know you for is something that is authentic to you, right? How to Piss Off Men is such a cool thing for Kyle because it really encapsulates like his sense of humor, the kind of like values he has. Like all of these things do actually really fit like who he is and the kind of person he wants to portray. And I think that's also true of this podcast. I get to showcase a lot of my personality in these interviews with people and like my writing beliefs and those things. And I love that. I love that people know me because of that. They actually know me. So just sort of some thoughts I've been having about this kind of thing, but feel free to stay tuned because I do have a really great interview with Kyle Prue coming up next. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Most Writers Are Fans. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm joined and today I have the pleasure of being joined with Kyle Prue. He is an internet sensation as well as like an internationally award-winning author, playwright, screenwriter. He's been writing for quite some time now. Welcome to the podcast, Kyle.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Terry.
Yeah, so I just want to sort of get into it because you've been writing for quite a while, right? Like, I think I saw on your website that you've been writing. You published a book when you were 18 years old.
Yeah. Very first book came out, when I was 18. I was one of those like teen authors, like one of those like, they're like, oh, this is a teen who wrote a book for other teens. And like you tour around and they're like, look, he's just like you. Like you should all learn to read. So definitely one of those types of vibe. Yeah, it's been a really strange journey from there to here, I think. I am really, really, really joyous about the fact, however, that I started with novels because like writing a novel is just like absolute like, it's like ditch digging. It's so hard and labor intensive and extensive. And there's so much that you have to worry about. And so I think it was nice to get through that many words by the time I started like moving into other mediums.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And I think it's interesting that the stuff you're doing now feels a lot more personal, whether it's the How to Piss Off Men stuff that is obviously comedy, but I feel like you put a lot of yourself into that. And then also like the essays you've been writing on Substack are quite personal, it seems. Has that been a bit of a transition to go from that more like your own life versus sort of like your imagination?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, writing, fantasy novels, it's so abstracted and it's barely about you. And however, I started to, as I like wrote more and more and as I got older, I started to like realizing that like finding myself in things that I was writing was not a bug, it was a feature. I think like it's oftentimes I think like a young writer insecurity to write about things that you like don't understand or things that are so far away from your experience. And I also think that it's a young writer flaw to write too close to your experience. To like write like, oh, this is like, I can't tell you how many people who I'm like, oh, what's your movie about? And they're like, it's about me and my life. It's about this thing that happened to me. And it is beat for beat the thing that happened to me. And I'm like, oh God. What I oftentimes tell people to do is like, think of, an experience you had and see if you can like dilute it down to one feeling and one image. And if that feeling and that image plays well together, then you, I think, have the beginning of like a very personal story.
Yeah, totally. I definitely feel like that resonates with me because I write fantasy, but I also feel like I very much write about myself. I always like to say I put a bit of myself in each of my characters. That way, I feel a bit closer to them. Like it makes it feels a bit more true. But also, I think that I've always thought of fantasy as the way to tell the best stories about the world we're living in because you can tell it through like a lens that looks a little less like what people's day to day are, while it's still like it gets the message through. I think a bit stronger. So
Totally. Absolutely. Well, when people see things they recognize, they tense up a little bit. I think people have like a lot of like preconceived notions about like the place where they live and the time that they're living in. And, I think oftentimes fantasy, I haven't written it in a while, but fantasy can be a nice way to kind of like trick people into having a disaffected, reaction to a situation.
so I feel like whenever people look at your life journey, like it would look like you sort of wrote for a while and then became an actor, and then decided to write again later. Is that the case, or like did have you sort of always been writing to some extent? Like how does that? How do you see that?
Yeah, totally. That's a good question. I think, yeah, I wrote these books, and I had always planned to go to acting school, and I had always acted. These were sort of two kind of concurrent passions that I think are very similar. It's all analysis. It's all like emotional truth, I think, at a certain level. But when I got to acting school, I had 4 years to kind of grind it out there, and that's when sort of some of my other fantasy books were coming out, and while I was there, I really decided I wanted to take the time to learn how to act in order to find out how actors speak. Because it was important to me. I was like, I want to do plays and I want to do movies, but I need to take the time to properly understand what makes compelling dialogue and compelling performance. I worked on a lot of, school assignments in college where they were like, if you want to learn how to write good dialogue, like go out and listen to people in the wild. I think that's a pretty common one. They're like, go out and like listen to what people say, but the way that people speak is not compelling dialogue. I think people in real life, like trip over things and they never have the right thing to say and they go in circles and they say things they don't mean. And I think for me, a lot of the acting experiment, I'm still acting, but I think a lot of the educational experience was I wanted to meet as many actors as possible and consume as much theater as possible and try to find out what my formula would be to write compellingly for actors. And yeah, I think after getting out of school, I was really interested in wanting to go into television. I didn't think I'd do another book, but I thought it would be like a long path to get back to writing books. But that turned out to not be the case, And these sort of things are all now happening all at the same time, which is stressful but wonderful.
Yeah, I definitely feel like because like I also do music, I do acting here and there, and I feel like whenever you are sort of like in these other worlds of art, I think it does inform your other arts. Like I definitely feel like reading more books or like reading plays or watching movies or whatever. I think does a lot to inform the way that you write. Do you feel like that has been the case for you?
Absolutely. I think if you only consume the art form you're interested in, you just get walled off, into like a really standard way of thinking. It makes it hard to like innovate. It makes it hard to move forward. It makes it hard to be unique. I had a lot of people, there was like screenwriting stuff that I would do where people would read it and they'd be like, I've never read anything written like this before. Like I've never read scenes like this before. And I was like, oh, and I out loud, I'm like, oh, thank you very much. But in reality, it's just theater. Like I'm just like taking the, sort of the bones of theater and putting the like flesh of film around them. And people are always like so baffled by it. And what I always tell like new like budding screenwriters if they want advice is I'm just like, you should read some theater, like find out what is possible with language, because I think a lot of, screenwriters are more interested in the movie of it all and the image of it all. But at the end of the day, your job is the words, your job is the text and the blueprint. So, like, don't worry about the image because that's the director's job to worry about. Like, when I write scripts, I focus on writing, like really, really compelling, interesting scripts to read. I don't think about the photography of it much at all because that's somebody else's job, you know? And so, yeah, my theory has always been that the more that you connect with other art forms, the more like pathways in your brain it opens up. And it just improves everything across the board. I think like this mixing and mashing creates just like really, really interesting work.
Yeah, yeah, I think the inverse is true too. Like as a writer, I feel like I'm good at dialogue, but I'm not as strong at like description. And I think that like watching movies and like kind of like looking at or visually, like if I'm trying to draw a scene, like describe a scene and I like draw it out on like a graphic designer or something, I think that helps me a lot because I'm actually like looking at it versus just like putting it in my head. So I think you're right. I think that sort of like looking at different kinds of art because different art excels in different kinds of things, right? And I think that in today's world where like we're readapting everything and everything is like every movie can be a video game, every video game can be a TV show, and etc. I think that it kind of muddles the waters a bit about like what these medias are. Do you feel like that is sort of the case where like we're sort of forgetting like what the strengths of each media is?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll read. This is a thing that people often told me about my books is that people would say, I can tell you wish these were movies. I can tell that you're trying to write, very filmic scenes, very filmic dialogue. I think there's real strengths to given mediums. You know what I mean? Like I think like the strength of like novels and literature in general is the fact that you can go so in depth and you can like explain like processes. Like you don't have to show people everything. Like you do get to tell and flesh out and expand. And I think one of the things that I always tell people when we're working on projects is like, let's think about the medium here and think about what serves the medium, and let's never do anything where it would be better served to be something else. Like I find this with TikTok a lot actually, where like I am not trying to, make movies and put them on TikTok. Not really. Like this is something that I absolutely could do, because I like make movies in my day-to-day life, but it doesn't really fit there. It feels kind of incongruous. I think like when I make TikToks, I'm focused on making like good TikToks, like good content and understanding like what are the features of the platforms that you're working in, or the mediums that you're working in. And I think like there are things that, like music can do that paintings can never do. And there's feelings that paintings can give you that music can never give you. And I think it's really interesting to take influences from one and put it in another. But I just think it's so important to have the thought process of like, what is special about the medium I'm working in? When we do our YouTube show or anything that really goes on YouTube or goes online that's like a little bit more thought out, I always tell people, like, remember, you don't have to over explain things because the comment section is built into this. Like in a movie, you need everybody to understand everything pretty much. Everybody needs to kind of walk out. Like your space for ambiguity is much there's a lot less there. But if you're putting something on YouTube, I just always tell people like, don't explain everything, because they're going to talk it out, and they're going to talk it out and it's connected to the video, and a lot of people are going to be reading this while watching the video. So yeah, I mean, like I think like as we venture into new media, I think like if people want to be artistic and want to make good stuff on it, I think it's just important to ask yourself like, what's special about this? What's interesting about the fact that this is vertical? What do I get out of this that I don't get out of a Broadway musical or a or a painting.
Yeah, so I'm curious about because I do feel like you're a very self-made. Your path is very self-made, right? Like you're doing Rabbit because you want to act more, and Rabbit is kind of a show that you're sort of allowing yourself to showcase a lot of what you can do. Do you feel like that path? Because I mean, I'm a self-published author, so like that path is harder, right? Like that path is harder than if you can sort of do the traditional path. What is your? Because I feel like it's great that people have more opportunity, but I also feel like it's challenging because first of all, it doesn't pay as well to do this path. Then at the same time, like it's harder to you're doing everything, right? Like it's so hard to kind of like wear so many hats. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, oh God, I think that I was in sort of the same boat. The first book I ever put out was like published at a like independent press that had like, 5 people working there, and they'd published like, 10 books before, and there's zero marketing money, and they did not care about me. And I like paid for like, I probably got scammed, like I like paid to have like, cover work, cover art and stuff, and then, yeah, I mean, you are doing everything. You are marketing your book. You are writing the book. You are meeting with book clubs. You are generating interest. You are driving around with books in your car and selling them places and all that. And I think, yeah, Rabbit can feel kind of similar. Like I hire pretty much every single person on the team, and I, put it all together, and I decide the vision for the show. And it's nice because there's nobody above me. There's nobody to tell me what I can and can't do. My creative output is absolutely limitless, but you do find ceilings that you don't find when you have support. You know, how to Piss Off Men is the first book I've put out with like a large publisher with resources. And it's just been so different because there's been so many things that I've reached out and been like, do you need me to do this? And they're like, no, we did that. We're actually surprised you know how to do that. Um, and yeah, I think like it depends on the scale of what you want to do. You know what I mean? Like if you're like, I'm an artist and my vision is my vision and my vision is the most important thing, and I want to keep that undiluted and I want to keep that pure, then I think you need to own every part of the factory that builds what you make, and you have to run every machine. But, if you want, bigger scale, and whatever it is, for film, it's usually like more time. You want a crane, you want to shoot something outside for once, like these things are better served by working with people who know what they're doing and have done it over and over and over again for years or decades. I think it's always a question of scale. What I will say is that if you go the I'm going to do it all myself route, then when you do get an opportunity from somebody, like when someone does finally throw a baseball your way, you have a really, really, really put together swing. Like that's, like I'm glad that I like wrote and put out books before I had like a big publishing contract. Like I understood how every part of the process worked. I understood how to market things. I understood how to put these things together. I think the place where people really get into trouble is that they don't go and refine their work and their craft, and then they get big opportunities and they just get launched onto a national stage and they get destroyed there. So I think like if you do endeavor to get discovered in whatever way, you do, it would behoove you to go and get like dominate the mechanics of whatever you're doing. Yeah, that was kind of a roundabout answer, but yeah, it's a thing that I grapple with
No,
constantly.
yeah, I really love that because first of all, it makes me feel like all of my hard work is maybe worth it because I'm getting a lot of valuable experience that I otherwise wouldn't be getting. But at the same time, I think it's a good point that it's good to sort of like understand this side of the business because like the truth is, How to Piss Off Men is a thing that you built very much from the ground up, right? Like it wouldn't have existed without your social media following and what you've done with it. So I'm sure I'm sure there's a world where someone like you hadn't done all the groundwork you had done previously that could be fully taken advantage of by a giant company, with something like what you're doing now. Like, do you feel like that has been valuable, like in the background to sort of like know that side of it?
Totally. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Here's what I will say. Like when I published my fantasy series, I drove around and I sold books for an entire year, and it was all I did for the entire year. I went to schools and I spoke to 100,000 kids. And that's what I got to at the end of a year, just hoofing it absolutely all the way through. I like fought for media attention. I got pretty much none the whole time. And now I have a platform, and I can talk to 100,000 people at the drop of a hat. And I do not think I really understood the value of that until it came to How to Piss Off Men and marketing it and like getting to look inside a big publisher and getting to sort of kind of see how their wheels turn. And I do think the platform has changed everything for me because I spent so much time like trying to get good at what I was doing and like practicing and trying to, like dominate these mechanics. But on a certain level, that doesn't matter if you can't get anyone to look at your stuff or read your stuff or whatever it is. Like if I had made Rabbit without a platform, I probably would have gotten like a couple hundred views. And like there would have been people like, oh my God, like why hasn't anyone seen this? But like I do think that there's a lot of noise now, and like I do feel a little more adept at cutting through it. And I think that is, I mean, it's a hugely valuable thing. However, we're only a few years into the kind of creator industry. You know, TikTok, for me at least, has only been around for like 4 years. So I've been like blown away by the changes it's made in my life, and the changes it's made to the way that I like produce things and like make stuff. However, I'm still so in it. It's hard to kind of get a retrospective on it. All I can really say at this point is it's great. It's done like really good things, and I'm glad that I don't have to drive all over the country and like mail books to, I'm like, do I know anyone in Ohio who could store 2,000 books for me while I drive down there? Like, I'm glad that's not my life anymore. And now my life is just like making TikToks and, people pre-ordering.
Yeah, that sounds way better.
Yeah, it's a lot less hoof in it.
I like the hustle I'm in right now, you know what I mean? But I'd love to not do this forever. That's the thing I think about all the time is like, I feel like what I'm doing right now is worth it, but it's like, I'd love this to not be my forever, you know?
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Take it from someone who just produced a season of television completely independently. There is a limit to human willpower. And, like when I made Rabbit season 1, I was like, wow, like I'm incredible. Like there is nothing that can't get done with the amount, like with the right amount of work, you know? But I think that there is a limit to what one person can do and for how long. But I think the nice thing is if you do that for long enough, if you do your own thing and you grind it out and you are the one-man band or the one-man army or whatever, and you make all your own stuff, it makes people feel really comfortable betting on you. Like if I'm going to publish something and I have two people who have like equally firm, solid novels, and one person has been, self-publishing for years and one person hasn't, I'm like, well, I know that the person who self-publishes wants this. And I know that they're willing to,
Yeah.
Commission cover art and like copy edit their own book, and like I know how much work they're willing to put into this, whereas the other person, you just don't know. I always tell people, like, whatever job you want to do it at the smallest possible scale that you can and do it every day. And then, when someone comes along, you are not, an aspiring, writer or television writer or actor or whatever it is. You are a person with a history of experience. Even if you're the first person to bet on yourself, it makes it way more comfortable for other people to bet on you.
Yeah, I like it a lot. So I think that will lead into our next conversation pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll take a break right now, and then we'll come right back. And whenever we get back, we'll talk about social media and promotion and all those things. All right. Welcome back to Most Writers Are Fans. I'm joined once again with Kyle Prue. And now we're going to talk a little bit about like social media, because Kyle's background, like I said, if anybody knows Kyle Prue, I'm sure if I say his name, you've heard of him before. He's sort of big on TikTok for this thing called How to Piss Off Men, where he lists ways to piss off men. And it's sort of grown into this thing. It has a life of its own. He has a book coming out soon. It's all about it. And I think that it kind of makes you sort of like especially in tune to talk about like promoting yourself on social media, which I think is something that authors especially struggle with, because by our nature, most authors are sort of introverted, right? So it's like hard to put yourself out there. So how have you kind of like talk a little bit about your journey so we can kind of get into it?
Totally. I mean, yeah, it's a good question, because, yeah, I do know that a lot of authors, are introverted, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable. And self-promotion is, by and large, pretty uncomfortable. I think here's what I will say. If you are like, all right, I wrote something or I made something, and now it's time for me to get on TikTok and get people to watch it, you are going to find that, I think, to be extraordinarily difficult. Like, because if you just show up in the first video you make, you're trying to sell somebody something, that could be rough, because, people are naturally kind of hostile to, ad content, but, branded content, whatever you want to call it. I think the thing about, TikTok, about Reels, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's important to, I think, get on there and figure out what content you would feel comfortable making and you would be excited to make. And then, get your footing, like branch out with it, or actually, no, niche down as much as possible. I have a friend right now who's blowing up on TikTok across the board, and all he does is he goes to local restaurants and, establishments in Los Angeles, and he finds out what the bathroom code is, and he posts what the bathroom code is. Um, which that might be a Los Angeles. It's such a Los Angeles specific thing. It's so niche, but I have heard people around LA talk about like, oh, have you seen this bathroom guy? Like, this is really funny. He's barely in them. It's really interesting. It's really niche, and it's really funny, because like it's sort of, this thing that now he's crowdsourcing all these bathroom codes all around LA. And I think like when you're starting, I think it's important to make something new and weird and different and small and be consistent with it. And then once you have a platform, these are people who sort of are waiting around to hear what you're up to, and they want to consume, whatever you're making, whatever you're doing. And so yeah, I guess my big advice as far as, I guess like promotion goes, because promotion can be extremely hard, is build the platform first if you can, before you start just like jumping right into promotion. And then the other thing is when you are promoting, make sure it's in your voice. Like work hard, like think hard about like how to fit promotion into the rest of your content. I've had an easy go at it recently because my content was how to piss off men, and the book I wrote was how to piss off men. But I think it's important not to make a bunch of content and then veer off track to do your ad or to like push your product and then veer back onto the path. Make sure things feel, I think, authentically in your voice. Because when it's not, people feel that and they scroll, they just move on.
Yeah, I'm just curious to sort of dig into like your journey on TikTok, because I feel like in 2020, like during the pandemic, there was like this class of people on TikTok that kind of like started making content. It kind of felt like for fun because we were all stuck at home and it was like, this is a thing to do. And it seems like you popped up around that time. I don't know but then there were a lot of people that it seemed like a year later, they're like, I have hundreds of thousands of followers. How did this happen? Is that kind of what it was like for you whenever it blew up, or were you kind of like, were you trying to make something happen?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. You talk to whatever you want to call them, content creators, influencers, people who have had success online. I guarantee you pretty much across the board, everybody says exactly the same thing. And what they say is, oh, I posted a few videos and then I posted one and it did really well. And it really blew up, and then I just kind of leaned into it. That is what everybody says. It is the response that I've gotten every time I've ever asked people. And so I got on TikTok during the pandemic when everybody else did. And TikTok was different back then. Like TikTok was like just like a famous person creation, engine. Like they were just blowing people up for nothing overnight. It's a little different now. It's a little crowded. Most of TikTok now is like, people trying to sell stuff, and it's all these brands and everything. But 2020, it was like the Wild West, and they were just pulling people out of the woodwork left and right. And so yeah, I made a video. It did really well. I got some followers, and I started posting just some like kind of random comedy stuff. And then eventually I was working on this film, and there were a couple people in the film who were there because they had a lot of followers. And I remember thinking like, man, it seems like they had an easier time getting into this film than I did. And I was like, I should maybe try and make a go at this, like try and make one TikTok at least that is like a well written, well created piece of content, instead of just kind of joking around all the time. And so I was doing this series, which was like, there was this guy on TikTok who used to do like these Limitless parodies where he had pretended kind of that he had like taken the Limitless pill from the movie Limitless, and he was going to like, he was going to get in shape, and he was going to get his finances in control, and he was going to read every day, and we were going to watch this guy become the best possible version of himself. And I made a parody of that video, and it was called like my version of it was that I was trying to become a himbo, where I had found intelligence to be a great burden, so I wanted to become a really hot idiot. And so I spent all these videos kind of doing this academic breakdown of how and what ways I could become a himbo, and like going into the definition of it and what was possible there. And I think got a decent amount of followers from that, and did some other stuff, very like kind of broad comedy, kind of like story based stuff for a while. And then I had some video I made which was like 10 seconds, and it was like, if you ever want to piss off a man, tell him that he sounds like when he's the type of guy who he seems like when he sleeps, he goes like me 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 me. And for whatever reason, that video got like a ton of views. And somebody was like, "Do you have more of these so that I can use them on my best friend's boyfriend?" And so I dropped like 10 in there, like 10 how to piss off men's, and it just like exploded. Like, and I think it's very oftentimes, this thing where like you have, 200 or 300,000 followers, and you say to yourself, like, I am pretty like that's the most famous you ever feel. But then, with How to Piss Off Men, the first week that it came out, that was my first like real deal viral moment, wherein like I had gotten that many followers in like a week, and like getting like tens of thousands of messages. And I think this was probably like late 2021. And it was completely different. You know what I mean? Like it's just interesting how like when you have a little bit of fame, you feel like the most famous person on the planet. And then it kind of opens up a little bit and you realize that you had no idea what you were talking about. And it's a completely different animal, and it's a completely different industry than you thought it was. And you get kind of maybe like some people get sucked into this kind of like never ending climb upward where they just try to get more and more and more. I think for me, it's been important to recognize that like this social media stuff has been fun and interesting and impactful and wonderful. But at the same time, too, like keeping the other pillars of my life and career healthy and like well fortified, so that it's not the kind of thing where my self-worth is dependent on an algorithm.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good reminder because I can tell you, it's even with the small following that I have, like it's so easy to just like make my worth. Like if I post a video that doesn't get likes, it's like, oh well, I'm a worthless person then, clearly, because nobody enjoyed this video. And it is very hard to not kind of like focus on numbers, or like especially as an indie author, like looking at book sales daily, like that's like just a recipe for like destruction. Like it's just not healthy to put your value in numbers. Period. It's just not good. But I think it's interesting to look at your path because you started doing something that was sort of your own thing, that was sort of like disconnected from acting or writing or whatever it is you were doing, and then but now you're kind of pivoting and using that thing to elevate everything else you're doing. Because like your platform helps you promote things like Rabbit. Your platform has kind of like helped you create a book. Like I think it's interesting because it's so different than what most indie authors do, because I see a lot of indie authors just sort of like keep posting video after video of like faceless book promotion because like they just don't know what else to do. Like, what would you tell people like that?
Yeah, I think what's really important is to get people acquainted with your voice. Like when you're writing, you spend all this time putting together a really particular sensibility. You're like, this is the kind of writer I am. This is the kind of things I'm interested in. This is the kind of stuff that I find funny. And I think my theory, at least, has been that you establish a voice and you get people interested in the voice, and you get people interested in your kind of flavor, your style, whatever you want to call it. And then if you do that, it sort of reaches across everything you do. Like when I have a lot of times I'll like post something and people will be like, "Oh my God, this is so Kyle Prue." And I'm always like, well, yes, it is me. I did make the video and post it, but like I like what they mean is that like there's an inherent quality that they've come to recognize. Maybe it's like a snarkiness or like a sardonic kind of like energy that I have that has sort of like branched across all these different mediums. And so I think like if you are a writer, you have, or a good writer at least, you are, by all means, you are creating your voice. You spend all your time writing in a particular affect. You are creating something recognizable, something that has like a tangible feeling to it. And so I think that like if you are a writer who wants to start making content, don't make content about your writing, make content in your voice, in the voice that you've spent so much time curating. And then, there was this thing where my book agent had reached out to me when he was not yet my book agent, when he was trying to be my book agent. And he had said, like, you should write a How to Piss Off Men book. And I was like, I don't really want to commingle the social media and the, writing stuff. You know what I mean? I don't want to be a TikTok author. And he was like, listen, I get that. I respect that. But if you can find a synthesis there, that is where you will find like huge success, like letting these things feed each other. And I think that, I mean, we'll see if it ends up working out, but that's been my sort of big hypothesis, is that like people who like Rabbit also like How to Piss Off Men, and people who like How to Piss Off Men like Rabbit, and those people will like the writing, will like the books. So when more books will come out, they'll read them. I think what you're really ultimately trying to do is you're trying to get people to be a fan of you and not one thing that you're making. And then the things that you make will all feed each other. You're creating people who are attuned to your style, your energy, your whatever you want to call it, the stuff you make.
Yeah, I think that checks out. I think that makes a lot of sense. I was interviewing an author a couple weeks ago. He had written a young adult series that got big, and he was saying that like he first wrote an epic fantasy novel that he was trying to shop, but like nobody wanted it because like everybody's doing epic fantasy. And the young adult novel took off, and he's now able to publish his epic fantasy novel because he's gotten a following with the young adult novel. So I think you're right. Like I think it's just like figure out something that will stick, like something that is you, that you could be successful, that you can attach your name to, then it can kind of like launch whatever else it is that you want to do. I think that does make a lot of
Totally.
sense.
And, I think there's a lot of, I mean, like, and I get this because writers or artists or whoever, they're very particular, and there's this energy of like, well, like I'm a fantasy writer. I am above young adult, or I'm above, like I know like directors, I direct, surrealist, magical realist, dramas. I'm above, rom-coms or whatever it is. And my challenge to all those people is, I think, like, see if you feel like you are above writing young adult, write the best young adult novel ever written. Like take the time to academically study the genre, like take the time to really figure out what makes it unique, what makes it interesting, and then see if you can like take the greatest swing you possibly can at it. Like I don't think anyone's above any genre or any, like piece of media or any form of media. And I oftentimes, I see that with people too. Like I know a lot of directors who are like, well, I would never make TikToks. And it's like, this is just a vertical video format. You can put anything on here. You know what I mean? Like try, like see if you can, like maybe that's your fear speaking. So I mean, I think that's an incredibly smart thing to do. You know what I mean? Like write a young adult book, do the thing that's selling, do the thing that people want to see, make it as good as you possibly can, and you'll create like lifelong fans who if they're young adults, they'll grow up and read your fantasy novels. And maybe they're not young adults and they're just reading young adult literature, and then and then they'll follow you right from that to your highbrow stuff.
And two, I think there's something to say about like doing something that is like incredibly personal, that is incredibly you, because then you're going to attract people to you who will then, and also I think the truth of it is, if you do something that's very personal, you're going to like be motivated to do it, and you're going to want to do it, right? Like I think for you, How to Piss Off Men was something that was a really specific intersection of like your style of humor, your kind of writing, like the kind of things you wanted to do. Like I think it was an interesting thing to take off for you because it really did kind of encapsulate like a lot of who you are, right? And that's true for like this other author. His young adult novel was very personal. It was about like a person who grew up in the place he grew up and somebody who was a lot like him. And like just speaking plainly, like for me, this podcast is like I don't want to be a podcaster forever, right? But I think that I enjoy conversations. I have a background in journalism. I like doing this kind of thing, and I feel like this is a way for me to kind of like show off who I am and what I do. And then theoretically, this could maybe parlay into something that could help my writing succeed. Like I think it's just kind of like leading into the thing that is your strength, but also like the thing that you enjoy doing.
Totally. And I think you often find it's interesting that you like set up camp somewhere and you're like, all right, this is where we're going to camp out while we wait to kind of like trek out into the thing that we actually go to the place we actually want. And, but I oftentimes find that you like, yeah, I sometimes feel that way too. Like I feel a little bit about like TikTok and, the social media stuff. It's a little bit of of a means to an end to do the stuff that I really want to do. But at the same time, too, like you spend time there and you're like, this is kind of fun. You know what I mean? Like this is neat, and there are inherent, like benefits here, and there is great stuff to do around here. I think, yeah, it's interesting. Like there's this kind of element of like if you're doing okay in whatever medium and you want to go somewhere else, it's important to be grateful just because like for some people that is their dream job. Like there's like I whenever I feel the need to be like, well, TikTok, it's all kind of a means to an end. I have to kind of take a step back and think to myself, like, well, like most young people in America wish that this is what they were doing, is being creative for a living, or making videos for a living, and like, getting some element of like recognition or affirmation or notoriety. So I think, yeah, one of the things that I always, tell like young artists that I'm working with is, gratitude is a value, but so is dissatisfaction. And you have to have both of them, which is really weird and complicated. And it's really dissonant to have them at the same time. But you have to say, like, I'm really happy for what I have and I'm happy for what I'm doing. And I'm going to put work into it and make it of quality. But at the same time, I do recognize that I want more than this. And I do recognize that I'm going to push forward. Yeah, it's interesting, but I think it's kind of an essential kind of like double mantra to hold.
It's such a weird thing because the truth is, like, I had this conversation on this podcast a couple episodes ago, which is like, I like doing this. I enjoy it. Like, I realized because I started doing this specifically as a way to kind of like build my following, and then I was like, wait a minute, I do actually enjoy this. Like, this is a lot of fun. I like connecting with people. I'd be happy doing this for a while, and but it is a weird thing where it's like, and I think this is maybe like the mentality that we live in. Because, like, I think there's something about like being successful like at our age, which is not like super, super young, which is like, we should have made it already, right? Like there's something about like, we're not ingenues anymore, and that's challenging. But at the same time, like, it's dumb. I think that sometimes you need to live life to be successful and to actually have ideas and to grow. Yeah, which is the idea of like, if I'm known for so as an example for you, like if you were known for being the how to piss off men guy on TikTok forever, like, would you be happy with that? And it's like, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But like, maybe.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, like, I think, yeah, I definitely don't want to be how to piss off men guy forever, but like that's that's kind of how it goes. On a certain level, you are like most recognized for the thing that the most amount of people recognize you from. Like, but I do think that like success breeds other success. So I think all you can really do is you can like hone your craft, hone your talents, hone your work, like focus on living a really full and complete life that has nothing to do with the thing that you're famous for. And then, the people who trickle away from your big moment and go to your other stuff, it's important that there's something there for them to really latch on to. I think the people who have trouble, are the people who have their big viral moment and everyone's like, well, what else have you got for us? Like we love you now because you did that one thing. Like what else you got going on? For me, after How to Piss Off Men, I was like, all right, everybody watch Rabbit, like, and I think if you don't have something, that's when you're in trouble. If I had done How to Piss Off Men and then people would be like, what else do you do? And I'd be like, what do you mean? I'm the How to Piss Off Men guy. That's when you're kind of screwed. So I think it's always you know where to direct people, when people ask what else you got going on. That's what Linktree's for.
Well, I think that's a great place to sort of call it. Any sort of like final words, advice to throw out there? I think you gave some really good tips there for people that may be struggling with how to promote, how to come up with this stuff.
Totally, yeah. If all this was extremely rambly, I understand. I'm trying to quit caffeine, so my mind is not. I don't have the quick fire wit that I did when I was mainlining stimulants all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think like the best advice that I have across the board, it relates to content, it relates to writing, it relates to work, all the way top to bottom is that whatever it is, you have to like it. You cannot expect other people to get on board and enjoy it if you don't. I know a TikTok is going to be an insane, huge hit when I can't stop watching it and thinking it's funny and like really, really, liking it. And it's like that with your work. It's like that with your writing. If you get to a scene and you don't really want to write it, but you're like, oh, this is what has to happen for the plot, you have to rework that scene, because if you don't like it, we can't all stick around for it, man. Like, you have to like your stuff more than anything. And so that's content, that's that's film, that's writing, that's everything, and so it behooves you as an artist, as a person who makes things, to really, really, really figure out what you like about your own work. And if it's nothing, well then, what do you like about other people's work, and how can you steal it?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Kyle. This has been great. Thanks for joining me.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Most Writers Are Fans is a Starlight King production. Special thanks to our guest, Kyle Prue. The audio and video for this episode of Most Writers Are Fans is edited by AJ Kumar. If you didn't know there was video, Most Writers Are Fans has video episodes now. They can be found on YouTube and Spotify. If you'd like to support the podcast, please rate and review it. Also make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to send a message or record a voice message, please visit the Spotify page for this show. Links for this and all additional information about Terry Bartley can be found on terrybartley.com. You can also email us at press@starlightkingpress.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be afraid to tell your story.